Hello and welcome to VIT Today's The Next Step. We have with us today Jaivignesh Jayakumar. He's a 2019 mechanical graduate from VIT and is currently pursuing his master's in management from ESCP Business School. Jaivignesh, welcome to the show.
Hey Akshay, thank you for having me here.
Great. Moving on to my very first question, were you able to utilize maximum opportunities presented by VIT during your stay there? Also, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I think regarding the opportunities, it's quite a subjective interpretation because VIT has quite a few student clubs and societies and different paths that one could take. So it's it's very difficult for you to kind of think back and say, okay, would I have ended up in a slightly different position if I'd have pursued a slightly different path? But I think the main takeaway for me is, if you're just entering VIT, just don't get overwhelmed by the number of opportunities that exist. Because in the end, it's better to kind of focus on your niche and find like-minded people, people who think on the same wavelength as you do, and kind of build that network as opposed to, pursuing quantity and just adding extra lines on your CV. Because I think that's a huge takeaway that I've seen for most of my friends, a lot of people who ended up taking a little more than they could handle on their plate earlier, but later realized that it's better to, stick to a niche that they really love.
Right. So at the end of your first year, you did a program migration basically from production to mechanical. So, I mean, what made you to take the decision and what was the impact of it?
Yeah, sure. I think at that point, I think retrospectively speaking, what I'm doing right now is, more aligned to production industrial than it is to mechanical. But I think at that point, I saw production and industrial engineering as a subset of mechanical engineering. And I was still younger. I didn't know what where I wanted to end up in the long run. So I thought, okay, maybe this is not the time to converge. So I kind of chose like a bigger sample set of options to play with by moving to mechanical. And yeah, I think the process was pretty straightforward. And at least back in the day, I don't know how it is now, but in hindsight, yeah, I think it's always good to stay a little more generic in your first few years, and then start to explore where you want to converge in towards the end of your degree.
Mm. Moving on to my second question, which is regarding internships. Most of your internships have been, business oriented or like consulting oriented. There's quite different conventional mechanical internships. So what was the reason behind choosing such kind of internships?
Yeah, sure. So I think the shift for me happened in my second year. So this was when I started getting introduced to managing a student club, the MEN Society VIT. So I think once I started doing this, I kind of realized that there's a lot more impact to be made in business management and, let's say, people management. So I think no offense to engineering, right? Those were all pretty cool internships too, and real respect for the people who continue doing that. But I found myself being satisfied more by exploring different kinds of fields, as well as having a very robust plan for professional and personal development. So I think that kind of also answers the why consulting question. So I was super interested in consulting because at that stage, one of my mentors had just gotten an offer from McKinsey, and I think that was the first time I even started to kind of understand what consulting was about. But I think once I realized that it's you keep rotating between projects, you end up handling multiple industries, and you kind of get thrown into problems that you've never heard of before. But it's just the best skill set to gain from consulting is just you get a very first principles way of looking at the world. You get to break down and decompose problems, and I think that's always a good skill set to have in the first few years. And I mean, other than this, obviously the other added benefits of having access to a diverse network early on in your career, as well as just really quick feedback cycles and professional development.
Right. Follow up to that again. How was your internship experience at Ernst& and Young (EY), and like what is the process to apply for such kind of internships?
All right, yeah. So this was my first business-oriented internship that I did in VIT. So at this stage, there was no I didn't go through a traditional process, obviously. So what I ended up doing was started contacting a lot of people working in the Big Four on LinkedIn, and started to understand the kind of work that they do and whether there was any resource crunch on their team, something that I could fill up. So when I was doing this, I got in touch with quite a few people that were looking for short-term internships and in different teams. And in fact, actually, the EY internship was a coincidence because the person I networked with, in fact, ended up being a manager of one of my best friends in VIT. So we ended up, working on the same project. But other than that, I'd say the best part to a business internship in undergrad is just network, network, and network. There will be someone who, sees your grit and would be willing to give you a chance on their team.
Right. So were you quite sure about pursuing higher studies, or was placement ever an option for you?
So at that point, I was quite confused, to be honest. I didn't know if placements was a better option or moving to another country to pursue higher studies. But I think the way I looked at it was there are traditionally two paths available for anyone who wants to do business management, right? So one is that you finish your college, enter a company, work for 2 to 3 years, gain some experience, then probably do an MBA and then come back into a different position. So that's the part that you take if you go through to go through placements, and then the others you do a business masters, not an MBA, and you get a quick pivot into the world of business management. So for me, I felt that the trade-off was justified because I could get a pivot into what I like doing earlier on in my life. Obviously, that's not the traditional path that a lot of people choose, but I think sometimes it's okay to kind of take that risk and take the leap as opposed to just working, in a job that you really not like and just end up putting in the hours and then do 2 years of business school and then come back. So that didn't really appeal to me, and I felt that there was quite some good options available at that point for business masters, which was why I ended up choosing that.
Right. So again, comparing between masters in management with other, MBA programs abroad as well as Indian B schools, why did you prefer for that, and not like in Indian B school MBA or something like that?
Yeah, sure. So I think my decision was more based on the kind of region that I wanted to go into. So I felt that business management in India obviously is of a equal or even better, caliber than what you have in Europe. But I think in the end, I wanted to step out of my comfort zone and kind of understand different cultures and working with different people who are a lot more open-minded than you'd find in India. And I think the decision about MIM versus MBA was just about the time, right? Like I wanted to enter the business management market in 21 or 22, as opposed to waiting a few more years for that. So I think that was what motivated my decision.
Right. About the geographical factor that you said, were there any reasons for considering Europe over other countries?
Yep. So I think for me, Europe was more of I think one is just about the Schengen zone itself. So once you enter Europe, you get to have access to different countries. And for example, even the program that I'm doing now, so I'm currently on an international rotation, spent my first 6 months in Paris, then another semester in Berlin, and then did an exchange in Switzerland, and now back for a gap year in Berlin, Dubai, and Amsterdam, and again for my final semester in London. So I think you really don't get exposure to so many different countries. If let's say you go for the US or Australia or something, you still are within that same bubble, right? Whereas if you do come to Europe and especially you choose programs that are part of the Erasmus bundle, which kind of allows you to travel around the region itself. And I think that was something that I really wanted to do. And other than that, I also wanted to kind of step out of the Anglo-Saxon culture that we're so used to and kind of understand how the rest of the world thinks about things, right? For me, the biggest takeaway from Europe was just how open-minded the people are, and just how there's no harsh competition, and it's just also collaborative. So I think that's something that's definitely refreshing coming out of India.
True. I must say, I think you have a stellar profile. So was it a structured plan of, learning certain skills, being a part of certain clubs or doing certain projects, or did you completely go with the flow? What was your approach?
Yeah, so I think once you enter VIT, the first few steps are kind of random, right? Because there are so many different people, the connections that you make, the kind of people you go to classes with. So I think that it's very hard to kind of game that or structure that. So your first few clubs or your first few touch points into the student society world itself would kind of be random. But once that happens, I think you can definitely structure yourself moving forward. So I think the main part of structuring yourself comes right after your second year, when you need to start thinking about what you want to do when you're finished with college, be upskilling yourself for placements or building a profile for international admissions. But that's something you need to start slowly, right? Because you need to look at this as a marathon, not a sprint, because it's unlike what a lot of other admissions consultants like to say. It's not about just the essays or the LORs or anything, right? Like your profile has to be built from the ground up, and the earlier you start, the better. So there are different things that work for different people, but as long as you have a plan, as long as you have, let's say, a short-term plan that you want to achieve in the next 6 months, as well as a vision of where you want to be in the next 2 or 3 years, then it's all about just connecting the dots between your short-term plan and your long-term vision.
So talking about your college experience, I mean admission experience, how was your journey to ESCP Business School and the do's and the don'ts you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people laugh when I tell them this, but I just applied to two colleges, ESCP Business School and ESMT. To be honest, did nothing out of the ordinary. Just wrote a bunch of essays, took my LORs, gave my interviews. But obviously, a few things to keep in mind is just um, I would say try doing as much of the process by yourself, right? Like, I understand that there's quite a big market out there for admission consultants and people that offer essay editing services and whatever. But I think in the end, this is also a chance for you to reflect, on your experiences and kind of understand where you want to end up and how what you've done so far is going to help you reach there. So I think even unfortunately if your admission doesn't work out, at least this introspections led you to understand more about yourself. And I would say that was the most important part of me, part of the process when I was applying for colleges abroad.
Right. I mean, we know that there's an internship in the works. So could you please reveal some information about that as well, your preparation, the networking that you had
Mhm.
for it?
Okay, so I think you might be talking about the summer internship at BCG.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, again, also, yeah, BCG was quite a dream for me for the last 4 years. So after applying unsuccessfully 4 times, this was the fifth time that I applied and got the interview. But I think the biggest change in the mindset that I had when applying this time was that there were no shortcuts to the process, right? You can't really just call a partner or someone who's sitting there in the office and ask them to refer you. That's not how this works. And you really need to put time in to understand the office that you want to go to, the kind of practices that they're interested in, and the kind of people that they're hiring, and just their vision for development in the region itself. And I think the way I went about doing it was started roughly 8 or 9 months ago. Started by just scheduling informational interviews with entry-level consultants, people that are just 1 or 2 years ahead of you, because those are the people that have gone through it very recently. Just hit them up, ask them for a virtual coffee chat, just try to understand more about the work they do, what energizes them, what drains them. And I think in this you get to do two things, right? One is you get to build rapport with people from that office, but more than that, you get to understand if this is a job for you, if you really do like doing it. Because the more people you speak to, the more different set of answers that you'd get, and based on that you kind of start to understand, okay, is this trade-off worth making? And for me it was. And which is why I was super happy once the interview process was scheduled. But yeah, after that, it was just a traditional set of case interviews and fit interviews and whatnot. So pretty sure there's a bunch of resources out there on the internet that could guide you much, much better than I can. But I think the biggest issue with, consulting or investment banking or anything is just getting the interview, right? Because
Right.
getting an interview is harder than actually cracking the interview. So as long as you can just network yourself efficiently and just get the right touch points through, then you get your interview, and from there it's fair game. You just have to be as good as the rest.
Right. What advice would you give someone who wants to get into consulting? The skill sets one must develop or the aptitude they must have.
Yep, sure. That's a nice question. So I think the main advice that I would give to people wanting to enter consulting is just be open-minded, right? Like, don't really put yourself in, let's say, a niche kind of field, or let's say restrict yourself. So be as open as possible. So even when I took mechanical engineering, I was just like, okay, I don't know if I want to do this, but at least this opens more options than it closes. And that's the same reason why I wanted to take a generalist Grand École Master in Management program, because that again allows you to specialize towards the end of your end of your time there. So one thing that I would like to say is the more you start converging, the more doors you close, and that really starts to affect you when you apply for generalist jobs like consulting.
Mhm.
But I think other than that, also, this is something that you're going to have to hone very slowly. Again, as I said, it's a marathon and not a sprint. So I would say just speak to as many people as possible, because in the end, a consultant's job is just communication, right? So if you can't sell yourself to someone having a phone coffee chat with you for 30 minutes, then it's very hard for you to sell yourself over an interview to a senior partner from the office that you're applying to. So I think it's just just keep your options open and keep talking to as many people as possible, increase your touch points, and something will definitely work out.
Great. So with that, we've come to the end of the interview. Is there any kind of message that you would like to deliver to your juniors watching this?
Yep, sure. I would just, I mean, I know right now it's a pretty hard time with COVID, and all the virtual activities that are going on, and I know it's no substitute for the kind of fun that we had in VIT in the past. So it's just one thing I would like to tell them is just just don't give up, right? Like, keep going. And I know it's been a pretty hard year for everyone, and obviously right now it might look like you're not where you are, but things will definitely turn out fine. Just stick with the process and stay hopeful. Connect yourself with other people, because I think at this point, the kind of organic connections that happen in VIT, like in the mess or just walking through the food court or something, it's not going to happen now because it's all virtual. So really take the time out and connect with people from your class, connect with people from the courses that you're doing, the societies that you want to join, and just make sure that you don't isolate yourself completely.
Very true. So thank you, JB, for the interview. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure speaking to you.